Tonight, we focus on mounting tensions in Europe after Russian jets once again violated NATO airspace. But first, let's set the scene. While part of our team was in Dorset covering the Liberal Democrats, the international story breaking over the weekend came from the Baltic, where NATO scrambled to respond to yet another Russian incursion. Laura Quensberg opened the programme from Bournemouth, reporting on the Liberal Democrat conference. She described the unpredictable conditions around her with characteristic humour, saying she was perched in the one spot on an outdoor terrace in a cafe that has cover, with torrential rain pouring down on either side. These are the small details that underline the daily realities of broadcasting. Sometimes just staying dry is an achievement. Meanwhile, back in the studio, Paddy O'Connell joined Laura and introduced James Waterhouse, the BBC's Ukraine correspondent, speaking from Kyiv. Their discussion soon turned from the light-hearted to the serious, with the pressing matter of Russian military provocations. James Waterhouse explained what had happened in stark terms. Over the weekend, we have seen over Estonian airspace 3 Russian fighter jets intercepted. That effectively means not being shot down, but being escorted off out of Estonian airspace, a NATO member, by jets provided by the likes of Finland and Italy. This was not an isolated incident. In fact, it marked the second time in a single month that a NATO state, first Poland, now Estonia, had invoked Article 4, the emergency clause that calls for urgent consultation among members when their security is threatened. While this is different from Article 5, NATO's collective defence commitment, it is nonetheless a serious escalation. Europe reacted quickly with condemnation, but the question remains, what kind of response can NATO realistically deliver without tipping over into direct confrontation? Laura pressed James to clarify what stern response really means. For newscasters, Article 4 is advisory, whereas Article 5 is the red button, one for all and all for one. James laid out the spectrum of options, noting that Washington's position remains cautious. He observed that Donald Trump's mind has not been changed even by a state visit to the UK to take more concrete actions against Moscow, either through further sanctions or heightened tariffs. Instead, much of NATO's current activity involves policing European skies with no-fly zones and intercepting drones. But frustrations are mounting, particularly in Poland, where incursions have become almost routine. James recalled that we have seen 19 drones make their way into Polish airspace, much to the anger of the Polish leadership. Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk put it most starkly, "We are not on the verge of war, but we are the closest to war we have been since the Second World War." His words underscored the seriousness with which European governments view these repeated Russian tests of NATO resolve. Into this tense picture stepped US President Donald Trump. Asked directly about the Russian jets, he admitted he had not yet been fully briefed, but his initial reaction was telling, "Well, I don't love it. I don't love it when that happens. Could be big trouble, but I'll let you know later." This hesitation, a familiar feature of Trump's foreign policy communication, has given Moscow an opening to probe NATO's unity. As one analyst noted during the broadcast, Russia is rattling the doorknobs. It's letting NATO know with a drone over Poland, with a jet over Estonia, that it's seeing what we've got in the locker. For years, NATO's strength lay in the perception of absolute unity. Any sign of inconsistency between Washington and European capitals creates an opportunity for the Kremlin to push harder. As the correspondent put it bluntly, any kind of suggestion that Donald Trump is inconsistent in dealing with the European powers and inconsistent in dealing with Moscow is the ideal time to test what we've got in the locker. At the heart of the disagreement is the question of European dependence on Russian energy. Trump has repeatedly pointed to what he sees as European hypocrisy, buying Russian oil and gas while calling for American support in defending Ukraine. James confirmed the underlying tension. Why would America help, he says, if there are European states continuing to buy Russian oil and gas? At one point during the invasion, European payments for Russian energy exceeded the total value of Western military aid provided to Ukraine, a fact not lost on Washington. The result is a deep transatlantic divide over how far the US should go in backing Ukraine, while Europe remains entangled in energy trade with Moscow. James Waterhouse then shifted the focus back to Ukraine itself, painting a grim picture of life in Kyiv. He reported that The Economist reckons it costs around $140 million per day for Ukraine to keep fighting this war. Despite repeated appeals for more Western support, the answers from allies remain vague. James explained, the detail just isn't forthcoming. It is a depressing rhythm. The costs are no less for Ukraine, and the sirens are the worst I have seen them. Perhaps the most shocking revelation was about the sheer scale of Russian drone warfare. James confirmed that 600 would be an average number now. The Russians at the moment have the capability to manufacture hundreds every month. These drones are not only numerous, but deadly. Kyiv has witnessed deliberate double-tap strikes where one missile hits, followed by another aimed at rescuers rushing to the scene. Even central government buildings have not been spared. We saw a ministerial building a couple of weeks ago hit in central Kyiv in a very deliberate double-tap, James recalled. For Ukraine, the ambiguity from Washington is proving especially costly. James reported that deliveries promised under the Trump administration are now being held up, undermining Kyiv's ability to defend itself. The atmosphere is heavy with uncertainty. Allies are cautious, Ukraine is desperate, and Russia appears emboldened. Each week of hesitation risks giving Moscow more confidence to expand its provocations beyond Ukraine's borders. After the intensity of the Ukraine segment, the programme turned back to UK domestic politics. Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana, figures on the left of British politics, have been attempting to launch a new political project. Yet, instead of unity, the effort has been plagued with disputes. Zara Sultana urged supporters online to join and contribute money, only for Jeremy Corbyn to rebuke her, saying this was unauthorised. The clash escalated, with Sultana posting that a clique of insiders had treated her unfairly, likening it to a boys' club. At the annual conference of his Peace and Justice project, Corbyn tried to downplay the row. He insisted that he and other independent MPs were not directing the group and promised a founding conference in November. But even he admitted the process has been quite difficult over the last few days. For Labour strategists watching from the sidelines, the schism on the left is more cause for amusement than concern. The failure of Corbyn and Sultana to unite reflects, once again, the tendency of the British left to split into factions. Whether this new project can ever become a coherent political force remains highly doubtful. Commentators noted that British politics since Brexit has been defined by fragmentation. Both the right and the left have splintered into smaller camps, weakening overall cohesion. In this context, a new left-wing project could emerge, but whether it can grow into a significant electoral force is another matter. Even if it survives, your party, the placeholder name being used, remains far from choosing a leader or even deciding on a logo. The dream of uniting the old left under Corbyn with the young left, represented by Sultana, already looks fragile. To close the programme, there was a shift in tone. A lighter feature explored the arrival of Ed Davey at the Liberal Democrat conference with a marching band. Listeners were asked to play along with a guessing game. Which band was Ed Davies and which was the Royal Military Band from President Trump's recent state visit? Laura, still reporting from a rain-soaked cafe in Bournemouth, reflected with humour on the absurdity of trying to identify marching bands while drenched and in the dark. These lighter interludes remind audiences that even amid global crises, politics retains its quirks and moments of levity. The episode wrapped with a preview of upcoming stories: the UK's recognition of the Palestinian state, an update on dementia and the power of music, and interviews with cultural figures like Andrew Lincoln and Alicia Vikander. But the core theme of the broadcast remained clear. Europe faces an increasingly assertive Russia, NATO unity is being tested, and Ukraine is bearing the daily costs of uncertainty. As Donald Tusk warned, we are the closest to war we have been since the Second World War. For Ukrainians living under nightly bombardment, that warning feels less like a prediction and more like their daily reality. And for NATO leaders, the question is no longer whether Russia will test them again, but how they will respond when it does.